Hello Africa, and welcome to another episode of AAU Talks. We're coming to you live from the headquarters of the Association of African Universities. I'll be your host for today, Agyemang Darko, and you can follow us on our social media handles, AAU_67 on Twitter, Association of African Universities on Facebook and YouTube. Today, we'll be discussing the Continental Free Trade of Africa and its role it plays in the Agenda 2023. But before we get to the discussion, we'll go for a quick pause. Right back.
You may not have heard about us, but we have heard about you. You've been searching for a new kind of university that matches your ambition. Our world-class education is renowned, but there is more to us. Meet the university in Ghana that is transforming Africa. One that is nurturing a new generation of ethical, entrepreneurial leaders. One that offers scholarships thanks to the Mastercard Foundation, so that you can be part of our community of students who stand for integrity, discipline, and excellence. There is only one such university, only one, where 100% of graduates receive job offers or graduate school admissions. You may not have heard about us, but we have heard about you. You are Africa's future. And we are Ashesi University College. Together, we can begin to create a new Africa.
Welcome back. And if you just joined us, we're on AAU Talks, and we're discussing the Continental Free Trade Agreement or area in Africa and its role in driving the African Agenda 2063. And I have with me here an astute youth personality. He is the Deputy Secretary General of the Pan-African Youth. So, in the name of Mr. Benin Ahmed. Welcome, Mr. Benin.
Thank you.
Great.
Good to be here.
Welcome to AAU Talks.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Thank you. We find this topic very, very important to driving our African Agenda 2023. We find that this agenda is really going to run for a very long time, an unforeseeable time, and we need the youth to drive this front. And that's why we have you here to speak to the issues. But to begin, what is the meaning of the Continental Free Trade Area?
Okay, let me thank you for having me here. It's good to be in your studios. I think that the Africa Continental Free Trade is a market synchronization regime that is being introduced by the African Union. And as we know, we've been striving for African integration for a very long time. And this whole element of African integration started with us having our regional economic commissions like ECOWAS, SENSAD, COMESA, ECA to integrate our sub-regional markets, allows us to move and trade freely. So CFTA is basically an expansion of this sub-regional integration initiative to open up our markets to all the 55 African countries and to allow us to be able to move goods, services, and commodities freely across borders. I think that the CFTA fundamentally is to allow us to have a common African market where Ghanaians can trade freely in South Africa. You can have Congolese trading freely in Ghana, and then be able to move services, goods, and commodities freely across the 55 countries. So fundamentally, like I said, it's a market synchronization regime. So it's going to move from just moving goods and services to harmonizing our customs union as a continent, so that when you produce a product in Ghana and you are moving it to Nigeria, you don't have to go through the hustle of needing to go through another set of custom rules at the border in Togo, in Benin, and in Nigeria. When you produce a product in Ghana, it is deemed as an African product, like the European Union is done. So CFTA is a big deal for us as Africans, and I'm confident that once we reshape it and then we fine-tune it, we're going to have an integrated Africa.
Great. It sounds interesting to say having a common marketplace in the African continent, but what was the fundamental base for this agreement? Which countries were signed onto it first?
I think CFTA has been an initiative that has been discussed over time. Last year in Rwanda, the final document was pulled together, and 44 countries had consented to that document out of the 55 countries. As we speak now, 18 countries have ratified it in their respective parliaments. Remember that when a document of this magnitude is developed by the African Union, you need to first domesticate it. What do I mean by domesticate? You need to first take it back to your countries, because we are still sovereign states. And so the fact that we are an African Union and we want to move as a continent does not end our sovereignty as countries. So you take it back to your parliaments, they do a review and analysis of it, and then accept that no, as a country, you need to hook onto it or accept it. So then, after signing, you need to take it back for it to be ratified. Currently, 18 countries have ratified it. We need 22 countries to ratify it for the policy to kickstart. So, like I said, it's been an initiative that has been discussed over years. And I'm excited that finally, we're able to put together a solid document in Kigali that is being sent to the countries. And for 44 countries to immediately sign onto it tells the level of acceptability and the consciousness and the extent to which Africans are committed to integrating and uniting their markets. One of the essentials that we need to understand with CFTA is the fact that every African country recognizes that we are the pool of natural resources in the world.
Yes.
And for us to have just 19% of our trade being intra-Africa trade alone tells us that with the enormous resources that we have, we are still at a disadvantage. And so the only time that we have a solid bargaining chip is when we unite our markets, and we are able then to say that, look, as Africa, all 55 countries, we have a common market, and then we can have a bargaining chip out there. So I believe that CFTA, as it was accepted or was signed by the 44 countries, sets sail the African economic boat, if you want to put it, and I'm confident that it would well position us moving forward, yes.
Mr. Ahmed, from your position assessing the progress of the Continental Free Trade Area, do you sense any hint of why it shouldn't be rapid? Because it is something that should unite Africa as at now, and something that should fully drive our Agenda 2063. So what is really a hint for 44 countries willing to review an agreement like that?
I think the whole element of African integration from the post-colonial era has been an issue of country sovereignty and country interest and how countries evaluate and position themselves strategically on the continent. So, of course, we may be one big continent, but we have our independent strategic and sovereignty issues that we have to deal with. So I don't find it being a challenge for countries trying to evaluate a continental document, because be that as it may, when you take a country like Ghana, the fundamental interest of our government is to protect the citizen interest.
Yes.
To protect the businesses, to create welfare, to create an environment where young people, business people, and then the general citizenry will feel a welfare environment is being created for them. So if you accept a document that then throws that expectation or aspiration into oblivion, then it becomes problematic for you as a government. Whilst our leaders do agree that a united or integrated Africa is going to create a more conducive environment for us as citizens of Africa to be able to increase our levels of welfare, it's important that you revert back to the citizens at one point in time to tell them that these are the initiatives that we are introducing and this is how it's going to benefit us. I think that's why the countries then, when the leaders accept these documents, they go back to their citizens to say, look, your representatives in parliament, do a scrutiny of this document and let's see whether that fits into the aspirations of respective countries. So it doesn't mean it's a challenge. The second thing that I would say is that whilst we strive for African integration, we must be able to accommodate the views and opinions of citizens and governments in terms of what their perspectives are or what they expect to be the driving force for integration. And for 44 countries to even initially consent to it tells you that the majority of Africans are committed to integrating and uniting around one thing, which starts with trade. So I don't find it as a problem. I only find it as a step of accountability to citizens and not leaders grouping in one place and taking decisions without reverting to the citizens. So I don't find it as a challenge at all. I just find it as a step of accountability.
If it was regarded that opening all borders in the African continent for there to be a free trade as a threat to quality of goods that are transferred because some countries don't have that credibility in producing quality, what is your view on that as a hinge to this development?
I completely disagree, because if you look at the African continent right now, majority of our imports come from China. And for us in Ghana, when we try to measure quality and inferiority, we try to use Chinese goods and European goods as a standard measure for determining what is quality and what is not quality. But what do we consume most? The Chinese product. And that's been one of the things that's propelled our respective economies into the rapid growth that we are seeing over time. Because until the introduction of these Chinese machinery and equipment that were cheaper in the mining sector, in the industrial sectors, we had difficulties. So I don't making that comparison, I don't think that it's about African countries producing inferior.
You don't think that's the reason why
no,
it's going at so much slow trail?
Exactly. I don't think so. I think that in our attempt to harmonize and synchronize our markets or integrate our markets, we need standards. And those standards must be set by Africans ourselves. What is it that we require? What expectations do we have of our manufacturers and our producers? We need to set those standards, because all the markets, the European Union couldn't have integrated their market if they had to question the credibility and capacity of industries in different countries. But then they have a harmonious system that allows them to be able to check quality control. And I believe that African countries, as it stands, are able to export some amount of resource outside the continent. Those are not in question. The industries in South Africa or in Egypt or in Algeria produce state-of-the-art products and products that are able to match or meet quality standards across the world. So it shouldn't be a precursor to the kind of arguments or the kind of conversations that we have. What is important for us as Africans is, first and foremost, looking at the kind and size of market that we have as a continent. Secondly, how do we leverage on the size of our economies or the population or the size of market that we have and the trade that we have amongst ourselves, and how do we use it to benefit the citizens of Africa? That should be the fundamental basis for having a conversation around CFTA. And for the issues of quality control, I think that we have the capacity to be able to regulate ourselves, to say that, look, if we are going to begin to produce medical or pharmaceutical products, we have capable scientists. I don't think that the African scientific community has not got the capacity to set standards that meet global requirements. We do have that capacity, and so it just takes us to strategically come out with policy measures and then quality control measures that cuts across all the 55 countries, and we are good to go.
Very well. If you just joined us, it is AAU Talks, and we're talking about the Continental Free Trade in Africa and how it connects with the Agenda 2023. Stay tuned, we'll be right back, more AAU Talks.
The Association of African Universities, AAU, under the patronage of His Excellency Abdel Fattah Said, Hussein Khalil el-Sisi, President of Egypt, and Ahmed Mohammed Ahmed el-Tayeb, the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, presents the AAU's Conference of Rectors, Vice Chancellors and Presidents of African Universities from 8th to 11th of July 2019. Theme: Role of Higher Education Institutions in Promoting the Continental Education Strategy, CESA 1625. Call for papers have been announced for the following sub-themes: Promoting Science and Mathematics Education, Expanding Technical and Vocational Education and Training Opportunities, Revitalizing and Expanding Tertiary Education, Research and Innovation, Promoting Peace Education and Conflict Prevention at all levels of education, Improving Management of Education Systems and Harnessing the Capacity of ICT to improve access and quality of education and training, Promoting Mobility through Harmonization of Quality Assurance and Accreditation Systems, and Identifying New Directions to Improve the Management of Education in Africa. Submit your paper abstracts of not more than 2 pages online at www.aau.org/subs/abstracts. Deadline for submission is 15th March 2019. For further details on Corevip 2019, please visit events.aau.org/Corevip.
Welcome back. We're still on our conversation on the CFTA, on its role in driving the Agenda 23. And coming back to Mr. Ahmed Benin, recently there was an article on Vanguard.com, Nigerian blogspot, and it was talking about what the running candidate, President Buhari, the comment he passed on the essence of the CFTA and with Nigeria's works. And he mentioned that he wouldn't want to open Nigeria's gate for any inferior goods or any goods of any kind to be dropped or damned. He used the word damned on their shores. And how does this dent the CFTA agreements? If that's the case, we're trying to integrate Africa in trade, and that is what one of the biggest economies in Africa is saying about this whole area of trade. What do you think about saying about it?
Remember I said earlier that the issue of CFTA may have its initial challenges. The fundamental essence of CFTA is to first allow us to leverage on the African market. As president of the biggest economy, his views are very important and we need to take them seriously. But the question I would ask is that, do we have the same regulation for Indian or Chinese goods that flood into our countries? And what are the standards? And is it the case that the African industries do not meet international standards? It cannot be the case. Within Nigeria itself, we have so many industries that produce, from pharmaceutical to spare parts of vehicles and motorbikes to all sorts of consumables that Africans require. And so when we reduce the issue of CFTA to quality control measures, then it defeats the real intent of CFTA. What I would expect is that countries in adopting CFTA would accept or also propose quality control measures in respective countries and ensure that we are able to synchronize our requirements. And we even have global standards. The ISO standards, they are not limited to European or American companies. They are global standards. And so the quality control boards of all countries then would be able to ensure that industries or producers meet those standards. If we then start the argument of opening up our borders to saying that countries will produce inferior, we need to have data to support that. And that data should be empirically verified to say, look, I cannot accept meat coming from Morocco or meat coming from Namibia because we think that they don't meet standards. But if you can allow meat coming from a European country, whilst in fact we have a lot of beef in Namibia, what we are saying is that open up Nigerian market or the Ghanaian market so that if Ghana does not have enough beef, Namibia can supply us with beef freely so that the food security issues are solved. If Ghana produces too much maize based on an intervention that the government has introduced and we cannot consume everything, we should be able to move that maize freely to Burkina Faso or to Niger or to Mali. So quality control, yes, but the entire free trade element is not anchored on industrial products alone. The everyday trade, the everyday moving of consumables, the everyday moving of foodstuff, the everyday moving of services, it's an integral part of the agenda to unite and integrate our markets. So yes, the president has his opinion on quality control and the quality of goods, but as a leader of the foremost economy on the continent, his voice goes very far. So we would expect him to commission a team that the African Union would accept. And I do know that the African Union itself looks at quality control because that is one of the bases for which we can move commodities from Ghana to South Africa or from South Africa to Ghana. But be that as it may, as we speak now, we have ShopRite in every country, in virtually every country in Africa. What are the quality control measures? We have Indomie in almost every country in Africa. I go to Sudan, I find Indomie. Indomie is produced in Nigeria. What are the quality control measures? So if we're supposed to begin to raise those barriers, then what we are saying is that every country should produce its Indomie. Every country should produce burgers by themselves. Every country should produce what they need to. And at the end of the day, what do? We open up our markets to China, to India, to Europe, which we don't have full control over because WTA has rules and regulations. Nigeria by itself cannot fight or cannot compete globally. The real essence of CFTA is to allow us to be competitive, to allow African countries to unite and have one big market that makes us more competitive, that gives us an edge in terms of numbers, in terms of trade figures. Because if you look at the figures right now per country, when you fit it into global trade, it's just like a drop of water in the ocean. So we are saying that let us unite as a continent. Let us be able to push for a bargaining chip. Let us increase our trade within ourselves from 19% to at least 50%. Then we'll be talking business. Because the most gold is found in Africa. The most cocoa is found in Africa. The most platinum is found in Africa. The most diamonds found in Africa. In fact, the most natural resources that we require for industrial purposes, we find them in Africa. So why would you have what drives industrialization and would not have an opportunity to be a player on the world trade stage? The only reason is that our numbers are few and our trade figures are nothing to write home about. The only time that we can increase that is if we unite these markets, allow us to be able to develop our industries, allow us to be able to create adequate market for the industries. Then we will not be talking about importing finished products. We'll be talking about attracting foreign direct investment, attracting companies that instead of producing in Belgium or in France or in Germany, they would rather produce from the African continent. Two simple things happens immediately. Jobs are created and capacity is built. So CFTA, beyond breaking down borders, would create a lot more jobs and would help build the African capacity in terms of skilled labor. So I want us to focus more on the element of breaking down the borders and allowing us to move freely. And then the other elements of standards would be introduced as we move on.
With the view of breaking borders, I mean, it is really paramount to making this happen to build our African economy. But considering health, or the recent epidemics happening in Sierra Leone and the Ebola factor, this fear on the people, we're trying to build an economy for Africans to also be successful. So if this also has a hinge on their health, what do you think it also plays on undermining the CFTA action?
I think that when we talk about health or pandemics as an impediment to trade, we start from a defeatist point of view, because we have health risk everywhere. Very recently, we had a pandemic in South America that had a spill over to North America. That didn't stop trade. In fact, what happens then is that it allows us to even be able to develop pharmaceutical companies that would bring out products to address our fundamental health challenges. And so I don't see Ebola being a threat to trade, because Ebola happened. As a continent, we were able to unite around one common purpose. We fought it. How many Ghanaians died out of Ebola? How many Nigerians died out of Ebola? How many South Africans died of Ebola? Liberia or Sierra Leone is just 2-3 hours from Ghana. If that was the case, so many Ghanaians would have been infected. So the issue of health and health pandemics virtually has little or nothing to do with us integrating our markets. Because whether you integrate the markets or not, people will move. In ECOWAS, for instance, we have free movement of goods and people.
Yes.
Sierra Leoneans do not need visas to come to Ghana. They just fly in.
Okay.
So if we then limit CFTA implementation to the fact that people will trade with other countries and then they will come back with ailments, then I think that we are just narrowing the scope and the real essence of free trade. Because I come from the northern part of Ghana, and from my home, we prefer to shop in Burkina Faso than to shop in Ghana, because the biggest city closest to us is in Burkina Faso. But we don't get there and come home with Ebola, or we don't get there and come home with some ailment that's contagious. No. What we are simply saying is that let governments agree that the already informal engagements that we have in our respective countries, let us formalize it, so that people don't go through unacceptable or illegal routes, but then it's formal. When you leave here and you are going to Togo, you don't need to go through unapproved routes, because we have one custom union, we have one big market, so we can move goods and services from Togo to Ghana, from Ivory Coast to Ghana, from Burkina Faso to Ghana, from Ghana to Rwanda, from Rwanda to Congo, from Congo to Uganda. That's the real essence of what we are talking about. But what we need to also look at, as I said earlier, what is the role or what's the position of our respective countries within the trade space, international trade space?
Yeah.
Once we can answer these questions, and then we can raise another question to say that if we combine our efforts as 55 countries, what becomes our position within the global trade space? Because then we can, as an African continent, say that, look, we have an industry or as a gold smelting plant that is stationed in Nigeria, so, and it can take X tons of gold per day. Are we able to feed that? So we add value to that, and then we can now export it as a value-added material to Europe or to America or to Asia or anywhere. But until we do that, the mining companies will not be African, and they would move in their ore states outside the continent. So it means that jobs are going out, welfare is going out. And so at the end of the day, you become a dumping ground for leftover or residue from Europe and from Asia and South America and so on and so forth. One of the critical things that I refer to when I'm talking of CFTA is chicken imports into Africa.
Chicken imports.
We import too much chicken from Brazil. Reasons being that Brazil deals with us as sovereign and independent countries. So Brazil deals with South Africa, deals with Nigeria, deals with Ghana. Imagine that we have one common market, and then we are supposed to produce, and then we know that there's an Akati Farms in Kumasi, or there's another poultry farm in Nigeria, like the former president of Nigeria has a poultry farm, and we don't have difficulty moving that product to Ghana. And it can supply Ghana, Burkina Faso, Ivory Coast. That's a very huge market. He wouldn't need to struggle to fly or ship his chicken out to America or to Europe. It's going to be right here in Africa. We have a common custom union, so there's no difficulty. We have the standards or the quality control mechanisms right here in Africa. So he meets them. So you realize that the volumes of trade increases. More wealth is left here on the continent. And then we are able to propel rapid socioeconomic growth among citizens and among states. And I think that that's what we should zero down on. If we want to then add other regulatory mechanisms, we are free as a continent to do that. But the baseline is that how do we create welfare for our citizens? How do we ensure that our citizens are comfortable? How do we ensure that the resources that we have are used to the benefit of our citizens? Baseline. Anything that doesn't answer these questions is a non-starter, my brother. Anything that any other person raises that does not answer the question of creating welfare, empowering our citizens economically, and using our natural resources to the benefit and progress of our states is not a question that we need to raise in respect of CFTA.
Very well. Looking at how to empower the African society through free trade, it's come to interest the African community in terms of our economy. We have 44 countries yet to join in on the CFTA agreement. If you were to use this platform as Deputy Secretary General to fly a message to all these leaders in these 44 countries about the economic benefits, which is embedded in the people growth, briefly, what would you have to say to them?
I think that we currently have a policy initiative that's been introduced by the African Union, which is the AU Agenda 2063, which is supposed to be a people-driven development. One of the pillars for a people-driven development is creating space for them to be able to economically empower themselves. To do that, they need markets. To do that, they need free movements of goods and services. To do that, they need an opportunity to be able to extend their competence and capabilities across borders. We can only do that by the efficient and timely implementation of CFTA. And that's very important. That we must understand that to create adequate economic space for our citizens, we need them to have the luxury and privilege of moving where their skills and goods are needed. And so what I would say is that our leaders should ensure that they adopt and accept measures that would drive rapid progress. And what are some of the measures? Trade is number one, because trade does two things. It moves goods where they are needed, and it allows people that have got the unique skill to produce services and goods that meet deficits elsewhere. And so that is what we should focus on. So I would encourage all governments, all states, and all citizens to advocate and ensure that we are able to trade amongst ourselves and move freely. I think that that is the only way, in terms of our socio-economic and cultural engagement, this is the only way that we can drive our development very fast.
Well, Africa, you have it right there on how to drive such a very vibrant and good economy in Africa. We need to encourage the Continental Free Trade Agreement. And as well as Ahmed Bennett said, that we need to get our leaders involved now. There you have an AAU Talks. Catch us next time as we talk more on how to build a great economy in Africa. I was your host, Agyemang. Next time, bye.